Hello everyone and welcome. Today we are going to tackle one of the absolute cornerstones of biology, biological classification. Now, why does this matter so much? Well, think about it. There are millions and millions of species out there. We absolutely need a system to make sense of all that incredible diversity. We're going to break down all the key concepts, make them super easy to understand, and hopefully easy to remember so you can walk into your exams feeling totally prepared. Let's dive in.
But first, let's start with a little puzzle to get your brain warmed up. You've definitely seen mushrooms popping up out of the ground, right? They kind of look like weird little plants, so why aren't they? Why do fungi get their own separate kingdom? What makes them so different? Just hang on to that question. I promise, by the time we're done here, you'll be able to answer that without even blinking.
Imagine walking into a massive library, but none of the books are organized. They're just thrown in giant piles everywhere. It would be total chaos, right? You'd never find anything. Well, that's what biology would feel like without classification. And believe it or not, people have been trying to organize life since, well, forever. The first real scientific go at it was from Aristotle. His system was pretty simple. He looked at plants and said, okay, are they trees, shrubs, or herbs? And for animals, he basically asked, does it have red blood or not? It was basic, for sure. But hey, you got to start somewhere.
Now let's fast forward a bit to Carolus Linnaeus. He gave us that classic two-kingdom system that you've probably heard of, Plantae and Animalia, plants and animals. Simple, clean, but wrong. As our science got better, the flaws in this system became glaringly obvious. I mean, it lumped simple prokaryotes like bacteria in with complex eukaryotes. It made no distinction between a single-celled organism and a huge multicellular one. And here's the big one for our little puzzle. It threw photosynthesizing algae and non-photosynthetic fungi into the same Plantae bucket. Clearly, we needed a major upgrade.
And that upgrade? Oh, it was a game changer. It came in 1969 from an ecologist named R.H. Whittaker. He didn't just add another category, he rebuilt the whole system from the ground up, based on much deeper, more fundamental characteristics. He gave us the five-kingdom classification. This is the system we still use today, and it's absolutely central to what you need to know for your exams. He laid out Monera, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia.
So, what was Whittaker's secret sauce? How did he make a system that actually worked so well? Well, he used 5 key criteria that went way beyond just what an organism looked like. First up, cell structure. Is it a simple prokaryotic cell or a complex eukaryotic one? Second, body organization, or what's sometimes called thallus organization. That's just a fancy way of asking, is it just one cell, or is it a bunch of cells working together as tissues and organs? Third, mode of nutrition. Does it make its own food, or does it have to eat other things? Fourth was reproduction. And finally, the big one, phylogenetic relationships. This is all about the evolutionary history, the family tree of life. Now, this table right here, this is the golden ticket for this chapter. It is the master key that unlocks everything. Let's just quickly walk through it. First, Kingdom Monera. The key feature? They're all prokaryotic. Simple as that. Their cell wall isn't made of cellulose, and they have diverse ways of getting food. Next, Kingdom Protista. Here we see the big jump to eukaryotes, but they're mostly single-celled. Now, Kingdom Fungi. Also eukaryotic and multicellular, but look, their cell walls are made of something totally different, chitin. And the nutrition, they are strictly heterotrophic. They're decomposers. And then you've got the two we know best, Plantae and Animalia. Plantae, multicellular eukaryotes with cellulose cell walls, and the defining trait, they are autotrophs. They make their own food through photosynthesis. And finally, Animalia. We are eukaryotic, multicellular, but with one huge difference, no cell wall. And we are heterotrophic. We have to ingest our food. This table single-handedly explains why a mushroom is not a plant. I'd seriously recommend pausing and just letting this soak in. It's incredibly high yield for exams.
Awesome. Now that we have that big picture framework down, let's grab our magnifying glass and zoom way, way in. We're going to take a deep dive into the first two kingdoms, which are often the most confusing because they're mostly microscopic, Monera and Protista. Let's go explore their incredibly diverse little worlds.
So, welcome to Kingdom Monera. If there is one thing to remember here, it's this. Bacteria are the sole members of this kingdom. That's it. They are all prokaryotic, which means no true nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles. And you can't even imagine how many of them there are. They are the most abundant microorganisms on Earth. A single handful of dirt can have hundreds of millions of them. They are the ultimate survivors, living everywhere from scorching hot springs to deep sea vents, and their metabolic diversity is just off the charts.
One of the most basic ways we start to classify bacteria is just by looking at their shape. And this is a classic exam question, so make a mental note. You have the round, spherical ones called cocci. The little rod-shaped ones are called bacilli. The comma-shaped ones are vibrio, and the spiral-shaped ones are spirilla. It's really important to have these 4 basic shapes down.
Now, the kingdom Monera is split into 2 major groups. First, you've got the archaeobacteria. Think of these as the extremists, the daredevils. They thrive in places that would kill almost anything else. You'll find them in super salty water. Those are the halophiles. In volcanic hot springs, the thermoacidophiles. And in the guts of cows or in marshy areas where they produce methane, those are the methanogens. And they can do this because they have a really unique cell wall structure. Then you have the eubacteria, which we call the true bacteria. These are the ones you're more familiar with, characterized by a nice, rigid cell wall.
Inside the eubacteria, there's a really famous group called the cyanobacteria. You might know them by their nickname, blue-green algae. But don't let that name fool you. They are 100% bacteria, not algae. They're super important because they are photosynthetic autotrophs. They have chlorophyll A, just like plants, and they make their own food. Now take a close look at this picture of nostoc. You see that one specialized thick-walled cell? That's called a heterocyst, and its job is absolutely critical. It can take nitrogen right out of the atmosphere and fix it into a usable form like ammonia, which is amazing for making soil fertile.
Okay, let's move on to our next kingdom, Protista. If Monera was the kingdom of all prokaryotes, Protista is the kingdom for all single-celled eukaryotes. This kingdom is really interesting because its boundaries are kind of fuzzy. It's like the miscellaneous drawer of the biological world. A protist that looks like a plant to one biologist might look like an alga to another. It basically serves as a connecting link between the simple prokaryotic Monera and the other 3 big, complex eukaryotic kingdoms, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia.
And the diversity in this kingdom is just wild. Look at these 2. On the left is a dinoflagellate. See those stiff cellulose plates? It's like it's wearing a suit of armor. Some of these, like Goniulax, are famous for causing those red tides in the ocean. Then on the right, you have Euglena. It doesn't have a rigid wall. Instead, it has a flexible, protein-rich layer called a pellicle. And Euglena is a mixotroph. What's that? Well, if there's sunlight, it photosynthesizes. But if it gets dark, no problem. It'll just hunt down and eat smaller organisms. Super adaptable.
Another incredible group within Protista are the diatoms. These guys are the main producers in the oceans. Their cell walls fit together like 2 parts of a soapbox, and they're embedded with silica, which is basically glass. This makes them almost indestructible. So when diatoms die, their little glass shells sink to the ocean floor. Over billions of years, this has created massive deposits called diatomaceous earth. And because it's so gritty and full of tiny holes, we actually use it for things like polishing and filtering oils and syrups. Pretty cool, huh?
All right, it is finally time to answer that question from the beginning. Let's explore the unique, weird, and wonderful kingdom of fungi. These organisms are not plants, they are not animals, they are their own thing, and they play one of the most vital roles on the planet. They are nature's ultimate decomposers.
So, why aren't they plants? Let's check the list. First and foremost, they are heterotrophic. They absolutely cannot make their own food. Most of them are saprophytic, which means they secrete enzymes onto dead stuff and just absorb the nutrients. Second, their cell walls are not made of cellulose like a plant's. They're made of a tough, complex sugar called chitin. And their bodies aren't made of stems and leaves. They're made of these long, thin, thread-like structures called hyphae. A whole network of these hyphae is called a mycelium.
And here are a few common examples you should definitely be able to recognize. You've got mucor, which is a common bread mold. Then there's aspergillus, another very common mold you might find. And of course, agaricus, which is the classic mushroom you see in the forest. It just helps to see the variety that exists even within this one kingdom.
Now for a concept that is a huge favorite on competitive exams. It has to do with the sexual cycle in some fungi like ascomycetes and basidiomycetes. In these guys, when 2 compatible hyphae meet, their cytoplasm merges, but their nuclei don't. Not right away, at least. This creates a really weird cell that has 2 separate haploid nuclei. We call this condition a dikaryon, and we represent it as N plus N. This unique 2-nucleus stage is a trademark of these fungal groups.
Okay, we have made it through the 5 kingdoms. But what about the things that don't fit in any kingdom because they're not even made of cells? Let's now venture to the very edge of life and talk about the acellular agents, viruses, the even simpler viroids, and the really strange prions.
And this brings us to one of the biggest puzzles in all of biology, viruses. Are they alive? Are they not? The name virus literally comes from the Latin word for poison,
And we know them as obligate intercellular parasites. That's a mouthful, but it just means they are completely inert, basically lifeless outside of a living cell. They can only come to life and replicate by hijacking the machinery of a host cell they infect.
Let's just look at the evidence. So what makes them seem alive? Well, they have genetic material, either DNA or RNA, and they can definitely replicate and evolve. But what makes them seem non-living? They have no cell structure at all. No cytoplasm, no organelles, nothing. They're completely inactive outside a host. And this is the wild part, you can crystallize them and store them in a jar for years, just like a chemical. It's this two-faced nature that makes them so fascinating. And they're not even the strangest things out there. Viroids are even simpler, just a naked piece of RNA. And prions are even weirder. They're just infectious, misfolded proteins with no genetic material at all.
All right, we have covered a huge amount of ground, from the massive kingdoms of life all the way down to these bizarre infectious proteins. Now, let's switch gears and get into full-on exam prep mode. This is all about locking in what we've learned and putting it to the test.
Okay, here is a perfect example of a multiple-choice question you might see on an exam like NEET. Read it carefully. A kingdom characterized by a chitinous cell wall, heterotrophic nutrition, and a body made of mycelium belongs to. I'll give you a second to think. If you chose C, fungi, you are absolutely spot on. Those are the three key defining features we just went over. Excellent work.
And let's wrap up with this final thought. Classification is not a story that's finished. It's not set in stone. The five-kingdom system was a massive improvement on the two-kingdom system, right? And as our technology, especially in genetics, gets more and more powerful, our understanding of the tree of life is only going to get deeper and more detailed. It really makes you wonder, what new kingdoms might we discover or decide to define in the future? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me today, and happy studying.